The message arrived through channels so classified that Captain David Hayes wasn't entirely certain they existed, until the holographic seal of the Zephyrian Empire materialized above his breakfast tray, causing him to spill synthetic coffee across 3 days' worth of military reports. The translucent emblem rotated slowly, casting prismatic light across his quarters aboard the diplomatic vessel Harmony, while a melodic alien voice issued what could only be described as a royal summons. "Captain David Hayes of the Terran Colonial Forces," the message began, though the translation matrix rendered it in a tone that suggested the speaker was either extremely formal or possibly discussing agricultural equipment. "Your presence is requested within the crystal spires of Queen Lysara, sovereign of the seven systems, guardian of the stellar winds, and—" The titles continued for nearly a full minute, each one more elaborate than the last. Lieutenant Sarah Kim poked her head through the door as David frantically mopped coffee from his paperwork. "Sir." The ship's AI detected an incoming transmission from the Zephyrian flagship. Something about vegetables and kitchen utensils. That would be the translation system attempting to render alien royalty protocols into something resembling English, David said, watching the holographic message repeat its incomprehensible formal address. "Apparently, Queen Lysara wants to see me personally." Sarah's eyebrows shot up toward her hairline. "The Queen, as in the absolute ruler of the most powerful alien empire in known space. The Queen who could glass entire planets with a casual thought. That Queen. That's the one." David studied the message's ornate seal, noting how it seemed to exist in slightly more dimensions than his human eyes could properly process. "And according to this translation, she either wants to discuss matters of galactic importance, or she's inviting me to help her prepare a traditional meal involving root vegetables and ceremonial cooking implements." The ship's intercom crackled to life with the voice of Captain Alina Martinez. "Hayes, report to the bridge immediately. We're receiving priority communications from the Zephyrian flagship, and our translation computers are having what can only be described as a nervous breakdown." David made his way through the Harmony's corridors, passing crew members who seemed to be experiencing various degrees of panic. The diplomatic vessel had been designed for exactly this type of situation, first contact scenarios where miscommunication could trigger interstellar wars. But apparently no one had anticipated the challenge of royal protocol translation errors. On the bridge, Captain Martinez was staring at a massive viewscreen displaying the Zephyrian flagship in all its impossible glory. The vessel defied human understanding of physics, appearing to be constructed from living crystal that pulsed with bioluminescent energy patterns. Sections of the ship seemed to phase in and out of visible reality, suggesting technology that operated across dimensional boundaries human science could barely theorize about. "Hayes, they're requesting immediate transport for you to their vessel," Martinez said without turning around. "Their queen apparently wants a private audience. Our xenocultural experts are having heated debates about whether this is a diplomatic breakthrough or the prelude to our complete annihilation." David felt his stomach performing acrobatics that would have impressed circus performers. "Any guidance on protocol for meeting with alien royalty?" "Smile, don't make sudden movements, and try not to accidentally declare war," Martinez replied dryly. "Beyond that, you're in uncharted territory. Oh, and Hayes, your environmental suit's been upgraded with emergency diplomatic protocols. Try not to let it embarrass us." The transport beam that carried David to the Zephyrian flagship felt like being dissolved in warm honey and reassembled as pure consciousness. When his molecular structure stabilized, he found himself standing in a chamber that challenged every assumption he'd ever made about architecture. The walls curved in directions that shouldn't exist, creating spaces that felt simultaneously vast and intimate. Bioluminescent patterns flowed across surfaces like living neural networks, responding to his presence with subtle shifts in color and intensity. 2 Zephyrian escorts awaited him, beings of elegant stature with the characteristic pointed ears that swept gracefully back from their temples. Their skin held a subtle iridescence that shifted through spectrums of color David had no names for, and their eyes contained depths that suggested intelligence far older than human civilization. "Captain Hayes," one of them said, the translation finally achieving something approaching clarity, "Queen Lysara awaits your presence in the throne of stars. Please follow and do not be alarmed by the palaces." Enthusiasm. As they walked through corridors that seemed to adjust their dimensions based on David's emotional state, his environmental suit began providing a running commentary on his biometric readings. Warning: elevated heart rate detected. Stress indicators suggest extreme anxiety. Recommend deep breathing exercises or immediate tactical withdrawal. "Not helpful," David muttered, causing his escort's ears to twitch with what might have been amusement. The throne room, when they finally reached it, defied every human concept of royal architecture. The space stretched upward into what appeared to be actual stars, with floating platforms and crystalline formations creating a three-dimensional maze of impossible beauty. Geometric patterns of pure light danced through the air, while the floor beneath David's feet felt alive, pulsing with gentle rhythms that matched his heartbeat. At the center of it all sat Queen Lysara. David's environmental suit chose that moment to announce, detecting elevated aesthetic appreciation responses, subject experiencing significant emotional impact. Recommend maintaining professional demeanor despite overwhelming sensory input. The queen rose from her throne with fluid grace that made David think of water flowing uphill. She was tall even by human standards, with the elegant proportions that marked her species, but there was something in her bearing that transcended physical presence, an authority that seemed to emanate from her very being without need for displays of power. Her court surrounded them, dozens of alien dignitaries, advisors, and guards whose biomechanical armor hummed with protective energy fields. The weight of their collective attention made David feel like a specimen under microscopic examination. "Captain David Hayes," Queen Lysara said, her voice carrying harmonics that made the crystalline walls resonate in sympathy, "you have traveled far to stand before us." David attempted what he hoped was an appropriate bow, though his suit helpfully announced, "Warning. Gravitational orientation suggests subject is performing greeting ritual designed for different species. Adjusting balance protocols." "Your Majesty," he began, then paused as the translation system rendered his words as something about seasonal agricultural implements. "I am honored by your invitation." Queen Lysara studied him with eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of his appearance, his bearing, his obvious nervousness at finding himself in such impossible circumstances. Around them, her court watched with the intense curiosity of beings witnessing something unprecedented in their civilization's long history. "You are not what we expected, Captain Hayes," the Queen said finally, and David couldn't tell whether that observation boded well or ill for the future of human-alien relations. The silence that followed Queen Lysara's observation stretched across the throne room like a held breath, broken only by the gentle harmonics of the crystalline architecture, responding to the emotional tension. David stood frozen, acutely aware that his next words could either advance human-alien relations by decades or trigger a diplomatic incident that would echo across the galaxy. "I hope that's a good thing, Your Majesty," he said carefully, then winced as his environmental suit added, "Subject attempting humor as anxiety management technique. Success probability, unknown." Something flickered across Queen Lysara's features, an expression David's human brain interpreted as either amusement or the prelude to his immediate vaporization. The court around them rustled with subtle movements, alien dignitaries leaning forward with obvious curiosity about this unprecedented interaction. Then, without warning, Queen Lysara raised one elegant hand and spoke a single word in her melodic language. The translation system rendered it simply as, "Leave." The effect was immediate and absolute. Her entire court, advisors, dignitaries, and the formidable royal guard in their biomechanical armor, began filing out of the throne room with practiced efficiency. David watched in growing alarm as the chamber emptied, leaving him alone with the most powerful being in known space. "Your Majesty," he began, his voice echoing in the suddenly vast emptiness, "if I've caused offense—" "You have not," Queen Lysara interrupted, descending from her throne with the same fluid grace he'd observed earlier. Without the elevated position of royal authority, she seemed somehow more approachable, still regal, still undeniably alien, but no longer a distant figure of absolute power. David's suit systems, apparently confused by this turn of events, began cycling through various threat assessment protocols. Warning: subject isolated with potential hostile entity. Recommend immediate extraction. Warning: no immediate threats detected. Recommend diplomatic engagement. Warning: situation unprecedented. Recommend consulting manual. Can you silence that device? Queen Lysara asked, and David was surprised to hear what sounded like gentle amusement in her voice. Unfortunately, no. Military safety protocols prevent me from disabling the biometric monitoring systems. David paused, then added, though honestly, it's probably providing more entertainment than useful information at this point. The Queen moved closer, her steps creating subtle harmonics in the living floor that seemed to welcome her presence. Your people's technology is charmingly cautious. It assumes that every situation is potentially dangerous. Well, to be fair, I am currently alone in an alien palace with a being who could probably destroy my entire species with minimal effort, David pointed out. From my suit's perspective, this is definitely a high-risk scenario. Queen Lysara stopped directly in front of him, close enough that he could see the intricate patterns of bioluminescence that flowed beneath her iridescent skin like living artwork. And from your perspective, Captain Hayes, how do you assess this situation? David felt his heart rate spike, and his suit helpfully announced, cardiovascular stress indicators suggest subject experiencing fight-or-flight response. Recommend immediate tactical assessment. Honestly, I'm terrified, David admitted. I'm also fascinated, confused, and fairly certain I'm about to make some kind of catastrophic diplomatic error that will be studied by future xenocultural experts as a textbook example of how not to conduct first contact. The Queen's laugh was like wind chimes made of starlight, a sound so unexpectedly delightful that David felt his anxiety begin to ease despite the impossible circumstances. Your honesty is refreshing, Captain. Most beings who stand before us speak only what they believe we wish to hear. Well, my suit makes it pretty difficult to hide what I'm actually feeling, David said ruefully. It's basically providing real-time emotional commentary, whether I want it to or not. Queen Lysara gestured to the now empty throne room, its crystalline formation still pulsing with gentle light. I dismissed my court because I wish to speak with you without the burden of royal protocol. Your people intrigue me, Captain Hayes. You have achieved interstellar travel through ingenuity and determination, rather than the patient development across millennia that marks most spacefaring civilizations. David looked around the vast chamber, noting how the bioluminescent patterns seemed to be shifting toward warmer, more welcoming hues. We're pretty good at stumbling forward through sheer stubborn refusal to accept that something is impossible, though I'm not sure that's necessarily a virtue. It is a rare quality in the galaxy, the Queen said, moving to one of the floating crystalline formations that served as furniture. With a graceful gesture, she indicated that David should join her. Most species develop caution as they advance. You have retained the capacity for, what is your word? Spontaneity. David approached the indicated seating, which adjusted itself to accommodate his human physiology with the same biomechanical responsiveness he'd observed throughout the palace. Spontaneity is one way to put it. Reckless disregard for common sense is another. Your reckless disregard for common sense brought you to my throne room, Queen Lysara observed. Perhaps it is more valuable than you realize. The palace around them seemed to be responding to their conversation, creating a more intimate atmosphere within the vast space. Gravitational fields shifted subtly, drawing their seating closer together, while the ambient light grew warmer and more focused on their immediate area. "Can I ask you something, Your Majesty?" David said, emboldened by the Queen's apparent interest in honest communication. "You may ask. Why me? I'm just a mid-level military officer who happened to be assigned to diplomatic escort duty. Surely there are more qualified representatives of humanity you could have requested to meet with." Queen Lysara was quiet for a long moment, her luminous eyes studying David with an intensity that made him acutely aware of his own mortality. When she spoke, her words carried a weight that suggested they came from some deep, private place. "Because, Captain Hayes, intelligence reports suggested that you possess something increasingly rare in positions of authority, the ability to see beings as individuals rather than representatives of their species, the courage to speak truth even when it might be unwelcome, and—" She paused, her bioluminescent skin flickering with what David was beginning to recognize as emotional response. "The capacity to find humor even in situations that terrify you." David's environmental suit, apparently deciding this was a moment of significance, announced, "Detecting unprecedented interpersonal connection patterns. Recommend. Continuing current social engagement protocols." "I think my suit just told me to keep talking to you," David said, shaking his head in disbelief. "The Zephyrian Empire spans 43 star systems," Lysara explained, her voice carrying a note of something David was beginning to recognize as profound loneliness. "But ruling from the center of such vastness can be isolating. Decisions that affect billions of lives, made from a throne room where the only voices I hear are those telling me what they believe I wish to know." David's environmental suit had finally settled into quiet monitoring mode, apparently accepting that this situation fell outside normal threat parameters. "That sounds incredibly lonely," he said, surprised by his own boldness in commenting on an alien queen's emotional state. "It is," Lysara admitted, her bioluminescent skin shifting to deeper, more subdued tones. "My species' longevity means I have ruled for 3 of your centuries. I have watched countless generations of subjects live their brief, vibrant lives while I remain constant, unchanging, increasingly removed from the genuine experiences that make existence meaningful." The crystalline formations around them pulsed with sympathetic resonance, responding to their sovereign's emotional state with patterns of light that seemed designed to offer comfort. David found himself leaning forward, drawn by the unexpected vulnerability in her voice. "On Earth, we have a saying about the loneliness of command," David offered. "But I don't think anyone ever imagined command that lasted for centuries. Your people fascinate me precisely because you have not yet learned to temper your emotional intensity with the caution that comes from extended experience," Lysara said, turning to face him directly. "Your species feels everything so, completely. Joy, sorrow, anger, love, all experienced with an immediacy that most advanced civilizations consider primitive." David felt heat rising in his cheeks. "Primitive seems about right. We're basically still emotional toddlers stumbling around the galaxy, aren't we?" Lysara's laugh was gentler this time, but no less musical. "Emotional toddlers who achieved interstellar flight, established peaceful first-contact protocols, and produced individuals capable of seeing beyond species barriers to recognize the person beneath alien appearances." "Is that what I'm doing?" David asked, genuinely curious about her perspective. "You are speaking to me as Lysara, not as the Queen of the Zephyrian Empire," she observed. "Do you realize how rare that has become in my experience? Most beings who enter my presence see only the crown, the power, the political entity I represent. You see, She paused, her ears tilting forward in an expression David had learned indicated intense thought. You see someone who might be lonely. David's suit chose that moment to provide helpful commentary. Subject's empathetic responses indicate strong emotional connection with alien entity. Social bonding patterns suggest significant interpersonal compatibility. Did my suit just analyze our friendship? David asked incredulously. Your technology appears to be quite sophisticated in evaluating emotional resonance, Lysara said, her tone carrying definite amusement. Perhaps it recognizes something that formal diplomatic protocols are designed to prevent, which is genuine connection between individuals from different worlds, Lysara said, her voice dropping to something barely above a whisper. The kind of understanding that transcends species barriers and political necessities. The palace around them seemed to be responding to their conversation with increasing enthusiasm. The bioluminescent walls had brightened considerably, creating patterns of light that David's human eyes found beautiful even though he couldn't identify their purpose. The gravitational fields had shifted to create an even more intimate space, effectively isolating them within a cocoon of warm light and gentle harmonics. Can I ask you something else? David said, emboldened by the atmosphere of growing trust. Always. Why did you really dismiss your entire court to speak with me privately? Because I'm having trouble believing it was just to discuss interspecies diplomatic theory. Lysara was quiet for so long that David began to worry he'd overstepped some crucial boundary. When she finally spoke, her words carried a weight that suggested she was revealing something she had never shared with anyone. Because, Captain David Hayes, I have spent 3 centuries surrounded by beings who worship my power while remaining strangers to my person. I have made decisions that shape the destiny of star systems while yearning for a single conversation with someone who might understand loneliness, doubt, the weight of responsibility, and the simple desire to be known as more than a symbol of authority. David felt something shift in his chest, a recognition that transcended species differences and spoke to the universal experience of isolation that leadership could impose. That's a hell of a burden to carry alone. Yes, Lysara said simply, it is. The silence that followed was comfortable rather than awkward, filled with the gentle harmonics of the palace's response to their emotional states. David found himself studying Lysara's profile as she gazed up at the star-like formations that served as the throne room's ceiling, noting how the bioluminescent patterns beneath her skin seemed to reflect her moods like a living emotional display. Your people have an expression, Lysara said eventually. Heavy is the head that wears the crown, but your human understanding of leadership spans decades at most. Imagine carrying that weight for centuries, with the knowledge that you will continue to carry it for centuries more. I can't imagine that, David admitted. But I can understand why you might want to talk to someone who sees you as a person rather than an institution. Lysara turned to look at him directly, her luminous eyes holding depths that David was beginning to realize reflected not just intelligence, but genuine interest in his thoughts and responses. You do see me as a person. Of course I do. I mean, you're clearly the most powerful being I've ever met, and you could probably reduce my entire home planet to cosmic dust with a casual thought, but... David paused, searching for the right words. But you're also someone who gets lonely, who questions her decisions, who finds humor in unexpected places. Those are pretty universal experiences. Universal, Lysara repeated as if testing the word. Yes, perhaps they are. David's environmental suit, apparently recognizing a moment of significance, provided its most diplomatic announcement yet. Interpersonal bonding patterns indicate successful establishment of cross-species emotional connection. Recommend continued social engagement for optimal diplomatic outcomes. My suit thinks we're becoming friends, David observed. Your suit, Lysara said, her smile transforming her features into something radiant and thoroughly non-threatening, may be the wisest piece of technology in this room. The revelation of mutual understanding between David and Queen Lysara created ripples that extended far beyond the throne room's crystalline walls. The palace's biomechanical systems, attuned to their sovereign's emotional state after centuries of symbiotic existence, began generating harmony patterns that hadn't been heard since the Empire's founding. Throughout the vast structure, Zephyrian courtiers and guards found themselves experiencing an inexplicable sense of contentment, as if the building itself had remembered how to be truly happy. In the security monitoring chambers, the dismissed royal guard watched their instruments with growing amazement as energy readings indicated their queen was experiencing something unprecedented. Genuine joy in personal connection. Captain Thane, commander of the royal guard, found himself facing a situation not covered in any protocol manual: what to do when your sovereign appears to be falling in love with an alien visitor. Should we intervene? Asked Lieutenant Kira, studying the biometric displays that showed both the queen and the human exhibiting what could only be described as romantic bonding patterns. Intervene in what? Thane replied, his scarred features reflecting centuries of military service. Her Majesty is safer than she has ever been. The palace itself is celebrating whatever is happening in that room. Back in the throne room, David found himself facing the most complex diplomatic situation of his career, and the most personally meaningful conversation of his life. Queen Lysara had moved closer during their hours of discussion, close enough that he could observe the intricate patterns of bioluminescence that flowed beneath her skin like living constellations. "David," she said, using his first name for the first time, "I must tell you something that may complicate this moment considerably." David's environmental suit, apparently sensing the importance of whatever was coming, remained mercifully silent for once. "I'm listening. My interest in meeting with you was not entirely diplomatic," Lysara admitted, her luminous skin flickering with what David had learned to recognize as vulnerability. "Intelligence reports about your service record, your character assessments, your responses to impossible situations. They painted a picture of someone I found myself wanting to know personally." David felt his heart rate spike, though whether from panic or excitement he couldn't tell. "Personally. You are not the first human I have encountered, but you are the first being in centuries who has spoken to me as Lysara rather than as the Queen. You see past my crown to whatever person exists beneath it, and you respond to that person with kindness, humor, and genuine interest." The palace around them seemed to pulse with approval, the gravitational fields shifting to create an even more intimate space, while bioluminescent patterns flowed across the walls in celebration of their sovereign's honesty. "Lysara," David said carefully, testing how her name felt in his mouth, "are you saying that you're interested in me, romantically?" "I am saying that for the first time in 3 centuries, I have found someone whose company makes existence feel like a privilege rather than a responsibility," she replied. "Someone who makes me remember that beneath all the titles and powers and political necessities, I am still capable of feeling connection to another being." David's suit chose that moment to provide its most helpful commentary yet. "Cardiovascular and neurological responses indicate subject is experiencing intense romantic attraction. Recommend honest emotional communication for optimal relationship development." "Did my suit just give me dating advice?" David asked weakly. "Very good dating advice," Lysara said, her smile making the entire throne room seem brighter. "Perhaps you should follow it." David stood up from his crystalline seat, pacing to one of the floating platforms while trying to process the impossibility of his situation. "Lysara, I need you to understand something. I'm just a career military officer from a barely spacefaring species. You're the sovereign of the most advanced empire in known space. This is like a peasant falling in love with a goddess." "Is that what you are doing?" Lysara asked quietly. "Falling in love with me?" David stopped pacing, turned to face her, and felt the weight of honesty settling on his shoulders like responsibility he couldn't avoid. Yes. God help me, yes, I think I am. The palace's response was immediate and overwhelming. Every bioluminescent surface blazed with brilliant light. Harmonics rang through the crystalline structures like celebration bells, and the gravitational fields created gentle currents that seemed to embrace both of them in approval. The building likes that answer, David observed. The building has watched me rule alone for centuries, Lysara said, rising from her seat with fluid grace. It recognizes happiness when it finally returns to these walls. She approached David slowly, giving him time to process the magnitude of what was happening between them. David, I am not asking you to become a consort or a political alliance. I am asking if you would be willing to stay, to continue these conversations, to see if what we have discovered here can grow into something that enriches both our lives. David looked around the impossible throne room, at the alien architecture that had become welcoming rather than intimidating, at the being who had somehow transformed from terrifying sovereign to someone he could imagine spending his life getting to know better. My military commission, my duties to Earth, he began, can be fulfilled from here, Lysara interrupted gently. You could serve as humanity's permanent ambassador to the Zephyrian Empire, a position that would allow you to bridge our civilizations while pursuing whatever personal connection we might develop. David's environmental suit, apparently deciding this was a moment requiring full disclosure, announced. Subject's biometric readings indicate overwhelming desire to accept proposed arrangement. Emotional fulfillment indicators suggest optimal life satisfaction potential. My suit thinks I should say yes, David said. Your suit is very wise, Lysara replied. What do you think? David looked into her luminous eyes, seeing depths that spoke of centuries of wisdom and loneliness, but also hope for something neither of them had expected to find. I think I'm about to make the most impulsive decision of my life. And I think it might be the best decision I've ever made. When David stepped forward and took Lysara's hands in his own, a gesture that made the palace sing with harmonious joy, he felt the weight of two civilizations' future settling into a new configuration. Not the political alliance that diplomats might have engineered, but something more fundamental, a connection between two beings who had found in each other the answer to questions they hadn't known how to ask. 6 months later, David found himself in a position that no military academy had ever prepared him for, serving as Earth's first permanent ambassador to an alien empire, while simultaneously navigating the complexities of an interspecies romantic relationship with its sovereign. The arrangement had created unprecedented diplomatic opportunities, though it had also generated enough paperwork to supply a small planet. His daily reports to Earth Command had evolved from formal diplomatic communications to something resembling a cross between political analysis and relationship advice column. His most recent transmission had included the observation that Queen Lysara's reforms toward democratic governance appear to be directly influenced by human concepts of individual rights, though I should note that Her Majesty's interpretation of romantic dinner involves seven-dimensional cuisine that occasionally exists in multiple time streams simultaneously. The palace gardens had become their favorite meeting place, where earth flowers now grew alongside Zephyrian bioluminescent plants in arrangements that seemed to pulse with shared contentment. David often found Lysara there in the evenings, tending to hybrid botanical experiments that represented the successful merger of two worlds' natural beauty. The earth roses are adapting to our soil composition, Lysara observed as David joined her among the glowing flower beds, though they seemed to prefer the gravitational fluctuations near the quantum orchids. Apparently even our flowers appreciate advanced alien technology, David replied, settling beside her on a bench that adjusted itself to accommodate both human and Zephyrian physiology. How did the council session go today? Surprisingly well, Lysara said, her bioluminescent skin brightening with satisfaction. The proposal to establish democratic representation for outer system colonies passed unanimously. Your insights about human governmental structures have proven quite valuable in restructuring an empire toward something more participatory. David's environmental suit, now upgraded with diplomatic rather than military protocols, remained tactfully silent about his elevated heart rate whenever Lysara smiled at him like that. I'm glad I could help, though I have to admit, 6 months ago I never imagined I'd be advising alien royalty on constitutional reform. 6 months ago, I never imagined I would be eager to hear a human's opinion on anything, Lysara replied, moving closer to him on the adaptive bench. Now I find myself looking forward to your perspectives on everything from interstellar trade agreements to the philosophical implications of quantum mechanics. The garden around them seemed to respond to their contentment, with bioluminescent patterns flowing through the plants in celebration of the bond that had transformed both their lives. Above them, the eternal stars of the palace's biodome created a perfect simulation of clear skies from both Earth and Zephyria simultaneously. David, Lysara said quietly, do you ever regret accepting my invitation to stay? David looked at the impossible beauty surrounding them, at the woman whose presence had redefined his understanding of what was possible in the universe, at the life they were building together that bridged worlds and species through the simple power of genuine connection. Never, he said, taking her hand in his as the palace hummed with approval around them. This is exactly where I belong. In his final report to Earth Command that evening, David wrote, diplomatic relations between Earth and the Zephyrian Empire continue to exceed all expectations. Personal note, sometimes the most important discoveries happen when you stop looking for them and simply remain open to the impossible. The universe is far stranger and more wonderful than we ever dared imagine, and love, it turns out, truly is the most universal force of all.